I was invited to a house party by a friend I barely knew. It was one of those last-minute things. Someone backed out, and there was suddenly space for me. I didn't have much going on that weekend, so I said yes. The house was a large, quiet one on the edge of town. It had that stillness around it that felt like no one had lived there for a long time. There were about 10 of us. Some were close friends, others were like me, just people someone else had brought along. The mood was easy at first. Music played softly in the background. People moved between the living room and kitchen, chatting, drinking, laughing at stories. The house had an odd layout. Long, narrow hallways. Rooms that didn't quite make sense in size. A few people commented on it. One guy, who said he'd helped set things up earlier, told us the place had been empty for years before the current owner moved in. That owner, he said, never stayed for long. I didn't think much about that. Old houses often have strange shapes. As the night went on, the group started to break into smaller circles. I ended up on a couch with 2 others, just talking about nothing important. That's when someone suggested we explore the rest of the house. The main floor was already open, but there was a staircase near the back that led to the upper floor. No one had gone up yet. We brought flashlights. The lights in the hallway upstairs didn't work. When we reached the top, everything felt cooler. The carpet up there had faded colors. The walls were bare, and most of the rooms were empty. Some still had old furniture covered in white sheets. One room at the far end had its door shut. Someone tried the handle, but it didn't move. We thought maybe it was locked. As we turned to leave, we heard a sound from inside. It wasn't loud, just something shifting, like someone turning in a chair. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then someone knocked lightly on the door. No answer, just quiet. We stood there for a while, waiting, but nothing happened. We left it alone and went back downstairs. Most of the group was still in the living room. The rest of the night was fine for a while. But things started to feel different, not in a big, obvious way. Just off. One girl mentioned the bathroom light kept turning off while she was inside. Another guy said he kept hearing someone walking upstairs, even though no one had gone back up since we left. At one point, the music turned off. Someone checked the speaker, but it was still connected. It just stopped playing. We turned it back on, but it kept cutting out every few minutes. We joked about it, but I could tell people were starting to feel weird. Later, I stepped outside for some air. It was quiet out there. The sky was clear, and the yard stretched out into trees. As I stood there, I noticed something in one of the upstairs windows. It looked like someone was standing there. The room was dark, but I could see the shape clearly. Just still, not moving. I thought maybe someone had gone back up, even though we said we wouldn't. I went back in to check, but everyone I'd seen earlier was still downstairs. I asked if anyone had gone upstairs. They all said no. We went up together to make sure. The room where I saw the figure was empty, still dark, still cold. Nothing inside. The window was slightly open, though. No one remembered leaving it that way. We closed it, then headed back down again. But things didn't feel relaxed anymore. People started talking less. Everyone kept looking around like expecting to see someone else there. Not long after, we heard a door shut. It came from upstairs. Not a loud slam, just the kind of sound a door makes when someone pushes it closed gently. We stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then someone said they were done for the night. A few people left, even though it was still early. Others moved into the kitchen and sat in silence. I stayed with one of the last groups, trying to keep the mood calm. But we couldn't ignore it anymore. The house felt like it was holding something in, like it didn't want us there. One guy got up and said he was going to check that last locked room upstairs again. We told him to leave it, but he wanted to try. We followed him up, not sure why. When we got to the door, it was open. We hadn't opened it. We were sure of that. The room inside was empty except for a single chair near the window. Nothing else. No decorations, no marks, no furniture. Just the chair, facing the wall. None of us said anything. We stood there for a few minutes, not wanting to step inside. Then we heard something from the hall behind us, like someone walking quickly down the stairs. We turned, but no one was there. That was enough. We all agreed to go back downstairs and wait until morning. No one wanted to leave alone, and none of us were in the mood to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, the lights in the house turned off completely. We tried switches, but nothing worked. The only light came from our phones. We stayed in the living room, grouped close together, waiting for the sun. At one point, I dozed off for a few minutes. When I opened my eyes, I noticed the door to the hallway was half open. I could see part of the staircase beyond it. Someone was sitting on the bottom step. It was just the shape of them, lit only slightly by the light from someone's phone on the table. They weren't moving, just sitting, still and quiet. I didn't say anything. I closed my eyes and stayed that way until light started to come through the windows. When morning came, we left the house. All of us. No one said much. No one looked back. We didn't talk about what happened. I never asked for an explanation, and no one offered one. A few weeks later, I reached out to the guy who invited me. He said he hadn't spoken to most of the people from that night since. He didn't even know who actually owned the house. Said the party had been organized by a friend of a friend. When I asked if anyone ever went back, he said no. The house was locked up again the day after. Nobody had the keys anymore. Sometimes I still think about that chair in the upstairs room. How it was facing the wall. How it was the only thing in there. How someone or something might still be sitting there, even now. But I don't plan to go back and find out. I was looking for somewhere quiet. Somewhere far from people, noise, and anything that reminded me of the city. I found a small cabin listed on a strange old website that didn't have many photos. Just a short description. Peaceful cabin behind the pines. No neighbors. No roads. Perfect for silence. It sounded exactly like what I wanted. Getting there wasn't easy. I parked my car at the edge of a dirt path and walked nearly an hour through thick trees. The trail wasn't marked, and the trees stood so close together that the sky almost disappeared. But finally, the cabin appeared, just like the photo. 1 floor, wooden steps, and a tiny front porch with a single chair. Everything about it looked old, but well kept. The lock worked fine, the windows were clean, and the key had been left exactly where the owner said it would be, under a flat stone beside the door. Inside, the place was smaller than I thought. 1 room with a bed in the corner, a little stove, a table with 1 chair, and a shelf with books that had faded covers. The only light came from the oil lamp on the table. There was no electricity, no signal, just trees on every side. That first night was still. So quiet that I could hear the trees moving outside whenever the wind touched them. I liked it. The next morning, I took a walk deeper into the woods behind the cabin. After maybe 15 minutes, I noticed something odd. Rows of broken branches on the ground, all laid out in the same direction. It looked like someone had dragged something heavy through there, but it was dry and nothing seemed fresh. I didn't think much of it and walked back. I spent most of the day reading one of the old books from the shelf. It was about birds and how they move differently depending on the season. The writing was slow and simple. I liked that too. Later, just before the sky turned dark, I went outside to sit on the porch. That's when I saw something strange between the trees. Not close, far enough that it could have been anything, but it didn't move like an animal. It was too still. It stood behind one of the thick trees, just at the edge of where the light reached. I stayed still, watching it. After a while, I went inside and closed the door. I didn't feel scared, just curious. I thought maybe it was nothing, a trick of light or my eyes adjusting. But that night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up, feeling like something was near the window. I never saw anything. There was no sound, but I kept waking up anyway, always at the same time. I checked my watch the 3rd time. It was just after 2 a.m. The next morning, I found small marks on the front step. They looked like lines scratched into the wood, not deep, just enough to notice. I sat outside with some tea and looked at the trees again. Nothing was there now. No shadows, no movement. Still, I decided not to go too far from the cabin that day. That evening, the wind picked up. The trees made soft noises as they shifted against each other. I read more from the book and made some food on the stove. By the time I finished eating, it was completely dark outside. Then something knocked on the wall. Not the door. The side wall, just once. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone tapping their knuckles gently. I waited. Nothing happened after that. I didn't get up right away, but after a few minutes, I walked to the wall and looked out the side window. There was no one there. I went back to the chair and sat down. The oil lamp was still burning. Its flame flickered a little from the breeze that slipped through the window frame. I kept thinking about how that knock didn't sound like an animal. It had rhythm. Just one short knock, then nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. I left the lamp burning, though the oil was getting low. Around the same time again, just after 2, I thought I saw movement near the window. I didn't go check. I stayed in bed and listened. I heard nothing else. The next morning, more marks appeared on the step. These ones were curved, like someone had dragged their finger in a half circle across the wood. I sat on the porch again, watching the trees. The same tree where I'd seen the shadow before looked different now. The bark was stripped in one place, as if someone had scratched at it. That night, the knock came again. This time, it was on the back wall. Just one. I didn't go check. I just sat there waiting. Then another knock, softer, on the front wall. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it slowly. The forest was quiet. The air was still. I didn't step outside. Instead, I left the door half open and went back to my chair. I wanted to see if something would happen. After a while, the door creaked a little, but didn't close or open further. I sat there until the lamp burned out. The next morning, I found the third set of marks. These ones were on the inside of the door. Small, almost like scratches from a fingernail. That was the first time I felt uneasy. I made tea and sat outside, thinking about whether I should leave, but part of me didn't want to. I had come here for quiet, for something different, and this was different. That afternoon, I walked around the cabin, looking at the ground, the trees, the windows. I didn't find anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches, but I noticed something behind the cabin I hadn't seen before. A tree had symbols carved into it, not words, just lines and curves, almost like shapes from an old language. The bark was dark around the edges, as if the cuts had been there for years. I ran my finger along one of them and felt how smooth the inside was, like someone had cleaned it out with care. That night, I didn't light the lamp. I stayed in bed, letting the dark fill the room. I thought if I didn't feed the light, maybe whatever was watching would lose interest. At 2 a.m., I woke up again. There was no knock, but the air inside the cabin felt different, heavier, the kind of stillness that isn't peaceful anymore. I stayed in bed, not moving. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dark and I could see the outline of the window, and just for a second I saw a shape move past it. Not fast, just slowly like someone walking. I didn't get up, I didn't check the door. Eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning I packed my bag. I didn't rush. I made tea again and watched the trees. The shadow was gone. The tree with the carvings looked the same. When I stepped off the porch, I looked down. The marks were gone, all of them. The steps looked like they'd been sanded smooth overnight. I didn't stay another night. As I walked back through the woods, the trail seemed longer than before, but I didn't see anything. No broken branches, no shadows, no movement. When I reached my car, I looked back one last time. Nothing followed. But ever since I left, I've noticed something strange. Every night, around the same time, I wake up. 2 a.m., always. Not scared, just aware, as if something is checking on me. And when I do, I sometimes hear a soft sound on the wall. Just once, not loud, and always in a new place. I was never much of a camper, but when 2 of my friends invited me to spend the weekend out in the woods, I said yes. They said the forest was quiet, full of clear trails, and perfect for getting away from everything. That sounded good to me. I packed light, just a sleeping bag, some food, and my flashlight, and we set out on a Friday afternoon. The walk from the road to the camp took a little more than an hour. The trail was soft under our feet, and the trees on both sides stood tall and still. It wasn't too hot or too cold. Everything seemed peaceful. We found a small clearing not far from a narrow stream. The sun filtered in through the trees, making patterns on the ground. We set up our tents, built a fire ring, and gathered some dry branches to burn later. There were no signs of other campers. No trash, no markings, nothing. That made the place feel untouched. One of my friends said it was perfect. The other agreed. That first night was quiet. We cooked some food over the fire and sat around talking until it got late. The trees made soft sounds when the wind moved through them. At some point, we stopped talking and just listened. The fire crackled gently. There were no birds, no frogs, nothing else. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt natural. But then something strange happened. We had all gone to our tents. I was lying there staring up at the inside of the fabric, trying to fall asleep. I didn't feel scared. I wasn't thinking about anything. I just wasn't tired yet. Then I heard something walking outside. It wasn't loud, just the sound of leaves being stepped on. A few steps, then nothing. Then a few more. I figured it was one of the others. Maybe they had to go to the bathroom. I waited to hear more, but it stopped completely. I checked the time. It was almost 2 a.m. I didn't want to call out and wake everyone, so I stayed still. The next morning I asked them if either of them had gotten up during the night. Both said no. One of them even laughed and said he'd slept better than he had in weeks. I didn't say much about it. The second day went well. We walked a trail that led deeper into the woods. The trees were closer together that way, and less sunlight reached the ground. Still, it wasn't uncomfortable. We found more streams and even a few small hills. Nothing felt out of place. That evening, as we were sitting around the fire again, I noticed something. A small pile of stones was near the edge of the clearing. I was sure it hadn't been there the night before. The stones were stacked in a way that didn't look random, 4 of them arranged neatly. I pointed it out. One of my friends shrugged and said maybe one of us had done it. The other said maybe an animal knocked them that way. We didn't talk much about it. The fire was warm and no one wanted to spoil the mood. That night, I heard the steps again, closer this time. They came slow, one step, then another. They stopped right outside my tent. I waited, listening. Nothing moved. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear the wind. Just that quiet, patient pause. Then slowly the steps moved again, away this time. In the morning I looked around. There were no prints, no marks at all in the leaves. But the pile of stones now had 6. 2 more stacked on top of the others. Still neat, still balanced. I told them again. This time, they didn't laugh. One of them walked around the clearing. He didn't find anything. The other said we were probably just overthinking it, but I could tell something was bothering him. We stayed that third night because we didn't want to pack in the dark. We built the fire higher than before. None of us said it, but I think we were hoping it would keep anything away. It didn't help. The steps came again. But this time, they weren't just near my tent. I heard them near the fire, then near one of the other tents, then mine, then silence. I lay there, eyes open, not sure what to do. Then I heard something else. It wasn't walking. It was a soft sound, like someone brushing their hand against fabric. My tent's fabric. Just one time. I didn't move. I waited for it to happen again, but it didn't. The steps faded after that. Nothing else happened. When morning came, none of us said anything. We all looked tired. The fire had burned low, even though we'd fed it well. The pile of stones now had 9. All of them balanced. No sign of them falling. No sign of anyone touching them. We packed in silence. We walked back along the trail without talking. I kept looking behind us, but there was nothing there. The woods looked the same as when we came in. Quiet. Still. When we reached the road, I felt something lift off me, like I could breathe easier. One of my friends said he was never coming back to that forest. The other just nodded. We didn't keep in touch after that. I think whatever we felt out there stayed with us for a while. Sometimes, I still wonder what would have happened if we stayed one more night, or if we'd knocked down the stones. But I'm glad we didn't. I've been camping since then, but never in that forest again. And I've never seen another pile of stones like that. Not even once. I used to work the night shift at a gas station off a quiet road. The place was small, 2 pumps, 1 register, and a back room with an old fridge and a cot nobody used. Most nights were uneventful. A few customers came in for snacks or cigarettes, but by midnight the place usually fell silent. I didn't mind the quiet. I actually liked it. I'd bring a book, sip coffee from a paper cup, and listen to the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The job was easy. Just keep the doors open, stay awake, and make sure nobody walked out without paying. One night, something felt different the moment I walked in. It was just before 11. The man I was replacing gave me a quick nod, said nothing unusual had happened, and left fast, like he had somewhere to be. I stood behind the counter, watched the security screen, and waited for the night to pass like usual. At first, everything seemed fine. One customer came in around midnight. She bought a bottle of water and left in a beat-up sedan. After that, it got quiet again. The kind of quiet where you notice the small things, the way the lights buzz, or how the cooler fan clicks every few minutes. It was around 1:30 in the morning when the car showed up. I heard it pull up, but didn't see anyone come in. I watched the screen above the counter and saw the car sitting there at the pump, engine running. The driver didn't step out. I figured maybe they were checking directions or having a quick smoke. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Still no one came in. I stepped out from behind the counter and looked through the front window. The car was still there, but the inside was too dark to see anything clearly. I waved once, just in case the driver needed help, but there was no reaction. Then the engine turned off. I waited, thinking someone would get out, but the door never opened. The car just sat there. After a while, I went back to the screen and tried to ignore it. Maybe they had fallen asleep. Maybe they were waiting for someone. But then the lights above the pumps flickered. Just once, like a small hiccup in the power. The station lights inside stayed on, but the ones outside blinked again. I glanced at the security screen. The camera feed for pump 2, the one where the car was parked, went black for a second and then came back. Now the car door was open. I hadn't seen anyone get out. I squinted at the monitor, looking for movement. The lot looked empty except for the car, which now had the driver's side door hanging open. Still no one inside. I stepped outside. The air was cold and still. I slowly walked toward the car. Each step made the gravel under my shoes crunch softly. The car was old, dusty. The paint looked faded under the yellow pump light. When I got closer, I realized the driver's seat was empty. The keys were still in the ignition, but there was no one around. I checked the passenger side. Nothing. No bags, no phone, just an old soda can in the cup holder and a pack of gum on the dashboard. I called out. No answer. The area behind the station was just a line of trees and a ditch. I walked a few steps around the back, shining my phone light into the darkness, but didn't see anyone. I went back inside and called the local dispatcher. Told them a car had been left at the pump and the driver might have wandered off. The dispatcher said they'd send someone out when they could. I watched the screen again. The door on the car closed by itself. It didn't slam, it just shut slowly like someone pushed it from the inside. I waited, hoping I had imagined it. The camera glitched again. This time, when it came back, the car was gone. I stood up fast and ran to the window. The lot was empty. No sound of an engine, no headlights. The car had disappeared and I hadn't heard it leave. The camera never caught the movement. Just a moment of static and then nothing. The next night, I came in early just to talk to the guy before me. I asked if anything strange had ever happened on his shifts. He looked uncomfortable, then shrugged. Sometimes people stop here, he said, but they don't always leave. I asked what he meant. He just shook his head and said he didn't like to talk about it. A few nights later, it happened again. A truck pulled in, big, black, quiet. It sat there for almost half an hour with the lights on. Then, without anyone stepping out or paying, it drove away. The cameras glitched again when it left. More cars started showing up, always between 1 and 3 a.m., always quiet. Sometimes they left, sometimes didn't. One night, a man walked in. He looked normal, wore a cap, jacket, jeans, picked up a soda and a candy bar. He smiled when I rang him up but didn't say much. Then he asked where the bathroom was. I pointed to the door near the back. He nodded and walked that way. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I knocked on the bathroom door. No response. I unlocked it with the spare key. The room was empty. He never came out. He never passed by the counter. The camera didn't catch him leaving. His car stayed at the pump until morning. I told my manager, but she just said weird stuff happens sometimes at night. I started writing down every strange thing I noticed. I kept a little notebook under the register. One night, I found a note already written there that I didn't remember adding. It said, "They're not leaving. You'll see." I started feeling watched. Sometimes I'd be stalking the back shelves and get the feeling someone was standing behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. The camera in aisle 3 would sometimes go fuzzy, and when it cleared up, the shelves would look like someone had pulled items out and placed them back differently. One night, I was taking a short nap on the cot in the back room, just a few minutes. I set a timer on my phone. When I woke up, the station lights were all off. The pumps were off too. My phone was dead, even though it had been fully charged. I walked out to the front. The door was wide open. The screen behind the counter was blank, and someone had written on the glass door in small, neat letters, "We wait for silence." I didn't know what it meant. I still don't. That morning, I asked to switch to day shifts. They didn't ask why. I never worked another night. But sometimes, when I drive past the station late in the evening, I still see a car sitting alone at pump 2. The lights flicker, and the camera above the register still glitches when you try to watch the live feed after midnight. No one seems to care. No one looks into it. But I remember, and I never stop for gas after dark anymore. I had just moved into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, and I liked that. The building was old, with wooden floors that creaked every now and then, but it had a certain charm to it. The neighbors mostly kept to themselves. People came and went, but no one bothered anyone. My apartment was on the second floor. The man who lived directly above me, I only saw once. He was tall, thin, and moved slowly, like everything he did took a bit of extra thought. His face didn't show much expression, but he nodded when I introduced myself. I never got his name. The first night, I noticed a noise coming from above. It was a steady, dragging sound, like someone slowly moving a heavy piece of furniture across the floor. It didn't bother me. I figured he was settling in, maybe cleaning or rearranging. But the sound continued every night, always around the same time, just after midnight. Always slow. Always dragging. I tried not to think much of it. I would put in my headphones and listen to music until I fell asleep. But sometimes the dragging would stop, and then I'd hear a soft, low sound, like someone whispering, but not in any language I could understand. I assumed it was the television. One morning, I ran into the landlord in the hallway and asked about the man upstairs. The landlord looked confused. "No one's rented that unit for a while," he said. "I had it cleaned, but no one lives there right now." I was sure he was wrong. I told him I had met the man. He wore a long coat, looked a bit older, didn't smile much. The landlord shook his head. "You must have seen someone visiting. That apartment's empty." I didn't argue. Maybe I was mistaken. But that night, the dragging started again. Same slow movement across the floor. I didn't know what to think. I started paying more attention. I'd turn off all sound and just sit in the dark, listening. After a few nights, I realized the dragging wasn't random. It went from one side of the apartment to the other, paused, then returned. Sometimes it stopped right above where I sat. I began to sleep in the living room, farther from the sound. It didn't help. The dragging followed the same path. One night, I got fed up. I went upstairs and knocked on the door. No one answered. I knocked again. The hallway was still. I tried the handle, but the door was locked. I went back downstairs and stared at my ceiling. That night, the dragging didn't happen. Neither did the whispering. For the next 3 nights, everything was quiet. I thought maybe the landlord had checked the place and scared off whoever had been there. On the 4th night, I woke up at 3 a.m. There was a light scraping sound right above me. Not dragging this time, just small, repeated movements. I turned on the lamp and sat up. It continued for a few minutes, then stopped. The next morning, I noticed something strange. In the corner of my bedroom, the ceiling paint had cracked in a thin line, almost like a mark had been made from above. I reached up and touched it. Dust fell onto my fingers. I wiped it away and tried to forget about it. That evening, I spoke to one of the neighbors on the first floor. She was older, kind, and seemed to know a lot about the building. "Do you ever hear anything from the 3rd floor?" I asked casually. She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head. That place has been empty since I moved in. Years now. Why? I told her I thought someone was living there. I didn't mention the dragging or the whispers, just that I had seen a man. She seemed thoughtful. I think someone used to live there, long time ago, kept to himself. Then one day he just disappeared. People said he was quiet, strange, walked like he didn't belong in his body, gave people a strange feeling. I thanked her and went back upstairs. That night, I didn't sleep. The dragging had returned. It was slower now. The sound scraped against the floorboards, then it stopped right above my bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I heard it. A quiet knock. Not on the door, on the ceiling. Just once. Then a pause. Then again. I didn't move. I just lay there until morning. After sunrise, I went upstairs. I knocked on the door again. This time it creaked open a few inches. I stood there, waiting. No sound came from inside. I pushed the door a little farther. The apartment was dark. Dust filled the air, floating in the light that came through a cracked window. No furniture, no lights, just bare floors and walls. I stepped inside slowly. The room was cold. The air felt heavy. There were marks on the floor, long scratches in the wood, as if something had been dragged over and over in the same path, from one side of the room to the other. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. In the far corner where the ceiling met the wall, there was a patch of darkness, a shadow that didn't match the rest of the light. It almost looked like it was watching me. I didn't stay to find out. I went straight downstairs and told the landlord the door had been open. He looked surprised. He said he'd check it out. Later that day, I heard footsteps going up, then silence. The landlord came down a few minutes later. He looked pale. "You said the door was open?" I nodded. "It was locked when I got there." I didn't know what to say. That night there was no dragging, no whispering, no knocking, but I found something on my bedroom floor, a small piece of wood. It looked like it had been broken off from the floorboards. It was old, dusty, and had a faint line carved into it, like a scratch. I threw it out and tried to ignore it. But over the next few weeks, things changed. I started waking up in different parts of the apartment, once on the couch, another time near the kitchen. I didn't remember getting up. One morning, I found the front door unlocked. Another time, the bathroom mirror had a small handprint on it. I lived alone. I stopped going upstairs. I stopped asking questions. But sometimes when I sat in the living room late at night, I felt the ceiling above me get heavy. Not louder, not warmer, just heavier. Like someone or something was directly above, pressing down, waiting. Eventually, I moved out. I didn't tell the next tenant about the man upstairs. The job was simple. Sit at the front desk, watch the monitors, and log anything unusual. Most nights passed with nothing happening. I took the night shift because it paid a little more and I didn't mind the quiet. The building was an old office complex. 5 floors, mostly empty now, just a few tenants still renting space. During the day, it stayed busy. At night, it was just me. I had a small office by the front entrance. There was a desk, a chair, and a wall of monitors showing the security camera feeds. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., check the lights, and start my shift. Most of the time, I watched videos on my phone or read a book. The cameras rarely showed anything. Once in a while, I'd see a raccoon outside or a light flickering in a hallway. That was it. But last Thursday felt different. Nothing looked wrong at first. The lights were working. The building felt as quiet as usual. Still, there was a strange feeling I couldn't place. It was like the building was holding its breath. At midnight, I checked the elevator feed. It was still sitting on the 3rd floor. No one had used it since my shift started. I scanned through the other cameras. Empty stairwells, vacant offices, all normal. At 12:20, I noticed something small. Camera 4, which covered the hallway outside the conference room, showed a door slightly open. I didn't remember it being open earlier. I went back in the footage. At 10 p.m., the door had been closed, but at 12:15, it was ajar. No one had gone in or out. I stared at the screen. The conference room hadn't been used in months. It still had the old projector and whiteboard inside, but no furniture. It was locked the last time I checked. I decided to go see it myself. I grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the stairs. The lights in the hall were on. Everything looked fine. The stairs were quiet. I made my way up to the second floor and then to the third. The hallway smelled a little musty. I walked past empty rooms and reached the conference room. The door was open, just like in the feed. I pushed it slowly. The room was dark. I turned on the flashlight and scanned around. Dust floated in the beam. The walls were bare. Nothing seemed out of place, except for a chair that was now in the middle of the room. I remembered the room being empty the last time I checked, so that chair stood out. I walked around it. It was one of those plastic chairs, scratched and old. It faced the wall. I didn't want to touch it. I stepped back and closed the door. Back at the desk, I checked the feed again. The door was closed now. I marked it in the logbook. 12:30 a.m., door open, unknown reason, closed manually. I tried to go back to my book, but I kept glancing at the monitors. At 1:10 a.m., something else happened. Camera 8, covering the break room on the 5th floor, blinked once. Then it showed a dark shape moving past the vending machine. I leaned closer. The shape moved slowly. It looked like a person, but I couldn't make out any features. No one should have been up there. I switched to camera 9, which showed the hallway outside the break room. Nothing. Then I checked camera 10, which pointed at the emergency stairwell. The shape appeared again, just for a second, then disappeared from view. I didn't like it. I radioed the backup office just to let someone know. No one answered. Sometimes the radios acted up, so I tried again. Still nothing. I didn't want to go up there, not right away. I waited and kept watching. At 1:35, I saw something again, this time on camera 5. The chair from the conference room, it was now facing the door. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't turned it. And no one else had gone in. I marked it down in the log again. 1:35 a.m. Chair moved, unknown cause. I felt like the building was playing tricks on me. At 2, I decided to do a full walkthrough. It was part of the job anyway. I started on the first floor and slowly made my way up, checking every hallway and room. By the time I reached the 3rd floor again, the door to the conference room was open. The chair was gone. I looked inside, empty. I turned on the flashlight and swept it across the room. No chair, nothing on the floor. I stepped out and looked both ways down the hall. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. On the 5th floor, I reached the break room. It was empty too. The vending machine lights were flickering, but otherwise it was quiet. I checked the stairwell, no one there. I checked the maintenance closet, still locked, nothing out of place. I walked back to the office and sat down. My legs felt stiff. I didn't want to look at the monitors, but I did. At 2:45 a.m., camera 6 showed something new. The lobby, where I had just come from, now had the chair in the middle of it. Same one from the conference room, sitting right in front of the elevator. I didn't move it. I watched the recording. Nothing had changed until 2:42. Then the feed blinked once, and the chair was there. Just appeared. No one dragged it in. It didn't slide across the floor. It just appeared. I got up and opened the office door. The lobby was empty. The chair was sitting right where the camera showed it. I stood still for a while, just looking at it. Then I went back in and closed the door. At 3:10, I checked the cameras again. The chair was now facing the front doors, still no one around. I started to feel like I wasn't alone in the building. At 3:30, I heard a soft noise. It wasn't loud, just something faint from the hallway. I opened the office door and looked out. The chair was gone again. I walked slowly to where it had been. The air felt cooler. I turned on the flashlight and checked the hallway. The chair was now down at the end of the corridor, near the locked archives room. I didn't walk toward it. Back at the desk, I stayed still. I didn't want to keep looking at the monitors, but I had to. I watched as the chair stayed in place for the next 20 minutes. Then the feed blinked. The chair was gone again. It didn't show up anywhere else after that. No more flickers, no more movement. At 5, the sun began to rise. The lobby started to lighten. I stood up and stretched. My shift was almost over. At 5:20, I checked the monitors one last time. All normal. Then I noticed something small. On the feed showing the 3rd floor hallway, right outside the conference room, the door was open again. Inside, just barely visible, was the chair. Back where it started. I didn't go back up. At 6, the day shift guard arrived. I didn't mention much, just said everything was normal and the logbook was on the desk. I walked out into the morning air and kept thinking about that chair. That night, I was off, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way things moved without reason. The shape near the vending machine, the sound in the hallway, the chair that kept changing places. When I came back 2 nights later, everything seemed normal again. The chair was gone. The cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. But now every time I walk past a room with the door half open, I pause, just to check. It was just past 11 when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a warning, just complete darkness, the kind that feels heavier than it should. Outside, the sky was overcast, so no moonlight slipped through the windows. The house, already quiet, now felt even quieter. There was no reason to panic. Power cuts happened, sometimes for no reason at all. The flashlight was in the kitchen drawer, right where it always was. The phone still had battery. Everything was fine. Still, something felt different. The air inside the house seemed still, like it was waiting. Each room behind a door felt more distant than usual. The hallway stretched a little longer than it should have. The sound of feet on the floor felt louder than before. Everything was just a little off. In the kitchen, the flashlight turned on without issue. Its beam was soft, not too bright, but enough to light the way. Moving through the house, each corner seemed to hold on to the darkness longer than it should. The beam touched furniture, walls, and empty space. Everything in its place. The living room was empty, so was the hallway. Nothing wrong, nothing strange, but the feeling remained. There had always been small noises in the house, pipes settling, wood shifting, but tonight they stood out. A soft thud, a light creak. Not enough to startle, just enough to notice. Walking past the guest room, the door was cracked open. It hadn't been open earlier. Maybe it hadn't been shut fully, maybe the draft moved it. That could happen. Still, it felt like a good time to close it. Just to be sure. Inside the guest room, nothing was unusual. The bed was made, the small window was shut. The closet doors were closed. Nothing looked touched. But the flashlight picked up something near the foot of the bed, a slight mark on the floor, like someone had dragged their hand across the dust. Maybe it had been there already. Shutting the door felt better. Back in the hallway, another sound. From upstairs this time, a light shuffle. Not loud, just one. The stairs were quiet while going up. The flashlight moved with care, each step checked before the next. The upper hallway was colder. Maybe the heat hadn't reached this far. Maybe the power outage stopped it. The door to the storage room was open. That one had definitely been closed. Looking inside, the room was filled with boxes, shelves, and old furniture. A blanket draped over something tall in the corner. It had been covered for years. The flashlight rested on it for a while. Nothing moved. Nothing looked different. Back in the hallway, another sound. This one from downstairs. A chair being moved, not fast, just a scrape along the floor. Not loud enough to alarm, just enough to stop. There had been no one else in the house. The stairs were slower going down. The flashlight stayed low, lighting each step, each shadow. At the bottom, the kitchen table was still in place. Chairs where they belonged, except one. One chair had been turned out slightly. Just a little. Not enough to catch the eye unless someone had been looking for it. Maybe it had already been that way. But something about the way it faced didn't feel right. The back door was locked. The windows were all closed. Nothing was broken. No signs of anything strange. But the sound of quiet had changed. It was no longer just stillness. Now it felt like something was listening. Not watching. Just aware. The living room had the best view of the house. Sitting on the couch, flashlight off, the darkness returned. The eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes became outlines. Nothing moved. There was a comfort in staying still. No reason to move again. If anything was wrong, it hadn't shown itself. If it was just imagination, it would pass. Then something shifted in the hallway. Just a light movement. The kind that comes from fabric brushing against a wall. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Just presence. No reason to speak. No reason to call out. If something was there, it didn't answer. A faint reflection on the glass of the front door showed the hallway behind. For a brief moment, something passed through it. A shape. Quiet. Unclear. The flashlight came back on, steady in the hand. The hallway was empty. The guest room door was still closed. The bathroom door was open, but it had always been open. The light touched the walls, the pictures, the rug, all the same. But now, the bedroom door upstairs was open. It hadn't been before. There was no sound now. No more movement, just the door, open. Going up again felt slower, like walking underwater. The flashlight moved steadily. The beam was focused. Each step checked again. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched. It didn't look longer, but it felt that way. The open bedroom door waited at the end. The room was dark. The flashlight lit the floor first, then the bed, the desk, the closet. Nothing was out of place. Nothing had been touched. But the window was open, only a crack, enough to feel the cold. It had been shut earlier. That much was certain. The lock was still in place, no signs of forced entry, no footprints, just air moving slightly as if something had passed through minutes before. Closing the window felt final, like finishing a chapter. The door was shut again. The hallway returned to normal. The stairs looked familiar. In the living room, sitting again, the feeling had changed. Not fear, not calm, just stillness. Outside, the wind had picked up. It brushed against the sides of the house, soft, uneven. The flashlight stayed close, but the lights did not return. Hours passed. Maybe 1, maybe 3. The phone battery ticked down, but there was no desire to check the time. Eventually, the feeling of being watched faded. Whatever had been there was gone, or maybe it was never there. Still, some things had changed. The chair had moved again, slightly. The storage room door upstairs was open again, and the blanket that had covered the tall object in the corner was now on the floor. I used to do food deliveries in the evenings. It was quiet work. People were usually polite, and I liked driving through the quiet streets after dark. I didn't talk much, and I didn't like noise. I just wanted peace, a job that didn't ask too many questions. Deliver the food, get paid, go home. One night, I accepted an order like usual. The instructions said to leave the food at the door. I followed the map. It took me to a street I had never been on before. It wasn't far from the main road, but it felt different. The houses were all old and spaced far apart, no street lights. The GPS said I was close, but I didn't see any numbers on the houses. Just long driveways, thick trees, and quiet all around. I found a house that matched the address. It looked empty, no lights inside. Just one porch light above the door, flickering a little. I walked up, holding the bag of food in one hand. I noticed the steps were dusty, as if no one had used them in a while. I knocked softly, then remembered the instructions. Leave at door. So I placed the bag down and turned to leave. Then the door opened behind me. I stopped, slowly turned around. An old woman was standing there, thin, very still, her hair white and flat against her head. She didn't say anything, just looked down at the bag. "I have your food," I said. She didn't look at me, just nodded a little and picked it up. I waited a moment, then walked back to my car. That should have been the end of it. But the next night, the same address came up, same order, same instructions. I took it again. The drive felt longer this time, the road darker. When I reached the house, it looked exactly as before. Dim porch light, no sign of life. I placed the bag at the door, turned to go. The door opened again. It was the same woman. She stepped out slowly, bent down to pick up the bag and held it close to her chest. Then she looked up. This time, she stared at me. Her eyes were dull, almost gray. Her mouth didn't move, but I felt like she wanted to say something. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, she turned and went back inside, closing the door behind her. I stood there a few seconds, then walked back to the car. The third night, I didn't want to take the order, but it popped up again. Same food, same address, same instructions. I hesitated, then accepted it. This time I brought a flashlight. The house looked worse than before. The porch light was out now. The windows looked darker. I walked up, shining the light ahead of me. The door was already slightly open. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, didn't move. Then I heard a soft voice from inside. "Come in." I didn't respond. I stayed still. The voice came again, a little lower. "Come in." I stepped back. I wasn't going in there. I left the food on the steps and returned to my car without looking back. I didn't take any orders for a few days after that. I thought it would go away, but it didn't. On the 5th day, my app started glitching. Every time I opened it, that same address appeared on the screen. I tried turning off the phone, even reinstalling the app, but it kept coming back. I told myself I wouldn't go. I would just ignore it. But the screen wouldn't change. I couldn't accept any other orders. Just that one. So I went back. The road seemed quieter than before. I didn't see a single car, no lights in any houses. Even the air felt still. When I pulled up to the old house, something was different. The door was wide open. I parked far from the driveway, didn't turn off the engine. I stood outside the car, looking at the house from a distance. No movement, no sound. I slowly walked up the drive, holding the bag of food. The steps creaked under my feet. The air smelled faintly of something dry, like old wood or cloth. I stood at the open doorway. "Hello?" I said. No answer. I leaned in slightly, just enough to look inside. The hallway was dark. I could see the edge of a chair, a table, and a lamp that wasn't turned on. The walls were bare, no pictures. The floor looked dusty, like no one had walked through in weeks. I called out again, still no answer. So I left the food just inside the door and turned to leave. As I stepped off the porch, I heard the sound of the bag being lifted. I didn't look back. I walked quickly to the car, got in, and drove away. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing things, not loud, just soft sounds. Paper rustling, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. I kept checking the door to my apartment, the windows, the locks. Everything was in place. But I couldn't relax. The next night, I didn't work. But the food showed up anyway. I found it on my doorstep, the same bag I had delivered the night before. The receipt had my name on it. I hadn't ordered anything. I opened the bag slowly. Inside there was no food, just a piece of folded paper. I took it out, opened it. There was no writing, just a drawing. A rough sketch of a person standing at a doorway holding a bag. Another figure stood inside, reaching for it. The sketch looked rushed, but the details were close, too close. It looked like me. I threw the paper away, took the bag out to the trash. I didn't sleep that night either. The next day, I checked the app. Everything looked normal. No strange address, no forced orders. I thought maybe it was done, but I kept hearing that voice.
It was a typical Friday evening after my classes ended, and I was out doing deliveries for a side job. This was my usual routine, making deliveries on weekends to cover my living expenses while at college. The night started off strong, with plenty of orders coming in and my earnings steadily climbing. However, after the dinner rush, things slowed down considerably. Orders were scarce, and the ones that did come in were low-paying, essentially a waste of time. After an hour of aimless driving, an order popped up that seemed promising. It was a bit of a drive, about 8 miles, but the payout was fair. Not great, but definitely better than the lowball offers I'd been getting. I accepted the order and walked into the restaurant to grab the food. With the bag in hand, I jumped in my car and started driving. The map showed it would take me about 30 minutes to get there, which was the longest distance I'd driven for a delivery so far. Most of the houses in the area were fairly close to campus, but this one was much farther out. After about 20 minutes, the scenery changed dramatically. There were fewer houses, and I was driving past vast stretches of farmland with nothing else around. The road became more desolate as I made my way down it. The last leg of the drive was along an isolated dirt road that wound through a farm field. Eventually, I arrived at the house. It was a small, dilapidated home tucked far back from the main road. The driveway, which was made of dirt, stretched through the field. As I drove deeper into the property, I started to feel a sense of unease. There was something off about the whole situation, even though I'm usually not easily spooked. The sound of my tires rumbling on the dirt was the only noise I could hear. I parked in front of the house, leaving the engine running. The night was still and quiet. and the house itself looked almost abandoned. The only light was coming from the porch, faintly illuminating the area around it. I grabbed the bag of food and got out of the car, making my way up to the porch through overgrown grass. I knocked on the door, glancing back at my car sitting alone in the dark, with nothing but fields behind it. I waited a moment, then knocked again. Still no answer. The house was eerily silent, and I began to feel something wasn't right. The porch light, though on, seemed out of place. Upon closer inspection, I noticed it was a solar-powered light, one that didn't require anyone to be present to function. That meant the house likely hadn't been occupied in a while. As I stood there, piecing it all together, I heard the sound of an engine. Turning around, I saw headlights approaching on the dirt road behind me. A car pulled up and stopped right behind mine. A man stepped out and stood by his vehicle, not saying a word. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the reality of the situation hitting me. The quiet of the night only made things worse. I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no one around to help. In a split second, I made a snap decision. Without thinking, I dropped the food bag and bolted from the porch, running behind the house and into the field. I glanced back, seeing the man beginning to follow me, and I pushed myself harder, weaving through the tall grass. As I ran, the grass grew thicker until it was nearly impossible to see anything in any direction. I knew by then I had gained enough distance that he couldn't catch me. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, and moved carefully through the crops, staying as quiet as possible in case the man was still looking for me. Eventually, I reached another property and found a road where I had enough signal to call for help. The police arrived, and we went back to check on my car. The man was long gone, but surprisingly, my car hadn't been touched. The food bag, however, was still sitting on the porch of the house. It was clear now, this wasn't just a robbery. The man had come there for something much more sinister.
I work the night shift delivering food. It's quiet most of the time. The streets are empty, houses dark, and people usually just want to grab their food and go. That's how I like it. No small talk, no drama. Just pick up, drop off, done. One night, I got an order that came in just before midnight. The restaurant was about to close, but they packed the food quickly. The address wasn't far. It showed up as a pin near the edge of town, just past a small row of houses. The directions were simple, but when I followed the route, it led me down a road I didn't remember ever seeing. No streetlights, just trees on both sides. The road kept going, and my headlights felt like the only light left in the world. Eventually, I saw a mailbox, old and dented, leaning slightly. The house behind it was hidden by tall grass and trees. No porch light, no signs of life. But this was the right address. At least, that's what the app said. I stopped the car and grabbed the bag, walked up the narrow path to the front door. No doorbell, just a rusted knocker hanging loose. I knocked once, then again. Nothing. Usually, if no one answers, I leave the food at the door and mark it as delivered. But something told me to wait. I stood there, holding the bag, listening. There was no wind, no animals, no cars passing by, just silence, thick silence. After a while, the door opened, slowly, just a few inches. I expected to see someone, maybe a tired old man, maybe a woman in a robe, but there was no one. I waited. Then a hand reached out from the dark behind the door. Pale, thin. The fingers were long and they shook slightly as they reached for the bag. I handed it over, careful not to touch the hand. The door closed just as slowly. No thank you, no words at all. I walked back to my car and sat there for a second. The order still said awaiting confirmation. Usually it updates the moment I hand off the delivery. I tapped the screen a few times, but it stayed stuck. Then the app froze. I restarted my phone. When it came back on, I was logged out. That had never happened before. I logged in again. The app showed no record of the order. It was like it never existed. I checked my earnings. No payment for that trip. I told myself it was a glitch and drove off. I didn't want to go back up to that door. The next few deliveries were fine. A few college kids, a man with a dog, a woman in her pajamas. Normal people, normal houses. But that house stayed in the back of my mind. A week later, another order came in. Same time, same restaurant, same road. I didn't realize it was the same address until I was halfway there. I should have canceled, but I kept going. This time, there was no mailbox. I remembered it clearly from last time, dented, leaning, but it was gone. The driveway was covered in leaves like no car had passed in weeks. The grass was taller. The path to the door was harder to see. I knocked again. The same slow silence followed. Then the door opened, just like before. The same hand reached out, same long fingers. But this time I looked closer. The skin didn't look real. It looked more like paper. Thin, almost see-through. I saw veins underneath. They weren't blue. They were black. The hand didn't shake this time. It just took the bag and slid back into the dark. The door stayed open for a second longer than it should have. I couldn't help it. I looked inside. It was pitch black. No furniture, no lights, just a hallway that seemed too long. It felt like looking down a tunnel that kept going, even when it should have stopped. That night, the same thing happened. The app froze. The order vanished. No payment. I emailed support. They didn't see anything wrong. They said there was no record of that address in the system. No deliveries listed at that time. I stopped accepting late orders after that. I'd log off by 10, even if it meant less money. But the strange thing was, my phone would still buzz around midnight. Always from the same restaurant. Always with no address, just a map pin out in the woods. One night, I ignored it. The next night, I turned off my phone completely. Then, around 11:45, there was a knock at my door. I didn't move. Another knock, then a pause, then another. I looked through the peephole, no one. But sitting on the ground in front of my door was a bag, one of the ones we use for deliveries. My name was written on the receipt stapled to the top. Same handwriting I'd seen on the other orders. Thin, messy, like it was written by someone who didn't know how to hold a pen. I left it there all night. The next morning, it was gone. No footprints, no trace of anything. After that, it didn't stop. Every few nights, the knocking would come back. And every time, a delivery bag would appear. Different food, same handwriting, always silent. One night I opened the door the second I heard the knock. There was no bag, just the same hand reaching up from the side of the doorway. Closer now. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, locked everything.